content mapping is essentially determining what is the right piece of content for the right person to deliver at the right time in the right medium, right? So it's really this amalgamation of how do I serve up the best user experience content. That's my definition.
Cool. So that commonly what you'll see is this will be associated with persona journey stage combinations. So I've got content for aviation executives who are in the awareness phase. It can also, in more mature orgs, combine with particular problems they may have or business issues. The commonly forgotten elements of content mapping are post-purchase. So post-purchase troubleshooting, post-customers, the content your customers would want to read are often forgotten. So if you imagine on one topic, you can have content that's early stage awareness for all different types of audience. You can have content on that same topic in the middle of the funnel, in the late funnel, troubleshooting. Still have that problem, even though I'm a customer, or amazing stories about how people like solve that problem and then solve other problems, right? So that's the content mapping strategy. Anything you'd add, Garrett?
I completely agree with everything Alexandra said. And just what you added to that is it really does start with that persona research, that audience research, understanding either who your customers are, your market product fit, and then taking that and extrapolating to what are their questions, as you mentioned, at every part of this funnel. The funnel is very much this traditional perspective of marketing where it's not knowing anything that they even have a problem and discovering they have a problem and wanting to find what that problem is and then trying to find solutions about that problem and then going further down that funnel to figure out what is the best solution. And for these organizations that we work with or any business in general, you want to have content not only tied to those stages in the funnel, but tied to the individual type of person.
What are the most common basic frameworks for mapping or misunderstandings or mistakes that people make with content mapping if it's their first time?
First and foremost, what type of organization you're in, how much do people already believe in the content and the marketing or communication story that you're creating? Is that going to help you? Can you make a better case there? Do you have humans with skills? Do you need some tools that might be helpful for you to outline these things and just mapping out this plan? And I think that the framework that I would think through is in terms of our audience research, right? It's who do we already know is looking at our stuff? Who is our target audience? There are a bunch of free functions I know just from doing in past lives, some LinkedIn sponsored updates, looking in the LinkedIn ad and validating your audience. Is that audience a super niche size or is it big enough to know that there are people out here? After we've identified the handful of folks that we think we have validated and communicated with internal teams about, right? I think that's maybe number one. Let's be humans first and loop in the people who are our allies in the organization, understanding what the pain points are at those different points in the cycle. How do we understand what those are is through keyword research, which would be maybe this basic framework that I would recommend is if you're going to invest in a tool to help with this content mapping, we have a lot of opportunity to do this kind of that artsy, right-brained creative stuff with the audience personas. There is a lot of demographic detail that we could get into and tools that you can use. But in my opinion, having a solid understanding of what that search intent is for those different personas and with those different pain points and of identifying what those queries are along each of the stages of this buyer's journey, right? My biggest piece of advice is that a lot of times we see folks coming into this and approaching content strategy piecemeal and saying, hey, I'm going to do this little thing here. I'm going to do this other little thing here. But what we're really trying to do, and it can be so easy to get there when we are looking at these granular pieces of detail, but remember to take a step back and think through, just as we were talking about, from acquisition to loyalty, from beginning to end, how are we keeping our folks engaged and what is the story that we want to be telling and how do we want to be positioning ourselves?
How do you think about search engine results page analysis or SERP analysis? And how do you think about that connecting to intent analysis? And then how do you use that information to drive better content strategy decisions?
Yeah. It's really hard. So first off, anyone who's doing this, like it isn't easy because it's always a moving target. One thing, that Jeff and I have joked about is like SERPs change all the time, whether that's new competitors coming into a certain results page based on a query, or just something as big as COVID happening and all of a sudden people are actually searching differently. The more general the term that someone is searching for, the harder it is to match that intent. The harder it is to know exactly what that person is searching for. And one thing that's interesting is a couple weeks ago, Google rolled out they've been working on this algorithm called MUM, which is the multi-unified model, which is a way that Google uses natural language processing to understand our queries better and take information from web pages, from images, from videos, and give you a more context-rich result. Google is trying to help you refine your query and help you get to the answer that you want. So bringing this back to how do you address it with your own search results, what you always want to do, sometimes it's a manual process of going to the actual current search results of the query that you're looking for and seeing what is Google ranking. And to Jeff's point, sometimes that's Google's search intent, but that's not what the user is going for. That said, if that's what Google is presenting, you still need to map content, in my opinion, to that query with the intention of having that content guide the user down the funnel. So it's like, to some extent, you are at the whim of Google to produce the content that Google thinks should rank for whatever that query is. As you get more long tail, as the search becomes more specific, then it becomes easier for you to map your content more specifically to that exact query.
Just because you see a definition in the search results doesn't mean you can just get away with just writing the definition on that topic. You just haven't earned it yet. And so how do you reconcile that? Someone says, the best page I can create, there's 9 definitions in here. It's clearly Google's favorite intent. Shouldn't I just create that? That's one where I have commonly have discussions with people who believe otherwise. They think that one page can stand on its own. So how do you talk about that?
So I think there's a couple of things, right? I think maybe 2 things. One being that, and the first thing that comes to mind and that we see a lot, and I think that I've seen a lot with working with some copywriters and folks who are understanding things, is the creating of copycat content. So that's something I think, and Animals actually a few weeks ago just put out this great blog about the difference between strategic and tactical content, writing content for the value curve that they talk about. So where we have some tactical content, which is how to, maybe matches a lot of these for these listings in the SERP, the first and couple pages of the SERP that you're trying to rank for. And Google likes that tactical content, but how can we come together and truly make something that's unique, right? Because if we, again, this comes back to that sort of art and science of this as well. And I love this one wonderful comedy bang podcast, improv podcast that is very niche. Recommend it. So big into the yes and. I love that. So it's not just creating this one thing and pausing, and also just doing it just to match this thing. We need to have, and that's where I think having a vast understanding of what the keyword universe is and how we can create supporting content through keyword cluster topics, and really making sure that we are establishing ourselves that are going to align with those EAT principles that are going to be the top thing that Google is ranking as value and quality content. How can we make sure that we are focusing on that? Yes, we need to satisfy what the robot readers are asking for and the robot readers are indicating is important, right, we also need to be understanding, we need to be thinking far beyond that. Again, it's a part of this bigger story, instead of going from stepping back, and that same practice of stepping back and seeing what is the bigger picture.
Something we were going to talk about is how do you deal with situations in the wake of an unexpected change in user intent? How do I deal with this if I expect this to be seasonal? So one is reactive. The other one is a seasonal intent dynamic.
And I think so. Those are really hard. I think with seasonal, there is, and the answer to both of these, in my mind, comes down to processes and comes down to being able to replicate a certain process, whether you're being proactive or reactive. In the seasonal sense, this is something that can be predicted, that you got Black Friday coming up if you're in e-commerce, and there's a certain like kind of length of 10 yards to the end zone that you know how much time you have to put the appropriate content in place when you're going to get more traffic, when you're going to have more eyeballs looking in your direction. So to have the frameworks or the processes in place 1 month ahead, 3 months ahead, 6 months ahead, that's on you not to be caught off guard and not to be caught flat-footed because you see it coming. As long as you have a process in place ahead of time, you can replicate that. And then to your question about agile, Jeff, I think it's about how do you handle those situations? Do people know what to do when the unexpected happens? Like I think about this in crisis communication, PR. Like with PR crisis, they always have okay, here's who we're going to talk to first. We're going to have the CEO prepped and how to respond. This person goes and preps the CEO. You don't necessarily know the what, the how. And so I think for those types of situations, when it comes to content, if you have, and this is especially the case for enterprise level, the bigger the organization, the more complicated the governance, the more important it is to have those processes in place. And then even those processes can be agile. So what I always go back to is have processes, have documentation, have training of your people to understand how to execute those processes. And then you can handle both a seasonal thing that happens annually or an agile in the moment.